As the real daughter whose life was taken away, it seems that I should be the most pitiful one, but when I returned to my real home and saw that girl who had just learned about her own background and fainted from crying, I felt a little amused. Why does it seem that she, the one who has occupied my place for nearly 20 years, looks a bit more pitiful? Kathy has congenital heart disease and can't stand being stimulated. My biological parents, the family doctor, and even the maid at home and the handsome young neighbor guy all gathered on the second floor in a hurry because of Kathy's illness. In this huge villa, I sat in the luxuriously decorated living room on the first floor, like an uninvited stranger. However, I didn't care. Before going out, I bought a bunch of lollipops from a small supermarket near my home. Since I was bored now, I just opened them and started eating. The candy was being rolled around by my tongue, making a clanging sound in my mouth. The sweet pleasure made me subconsciously squint my eyes and smile. My best friend always said that I looked like a cat at this moment, but I didn't think so. George, who came down from the upstairs, just happened to see this scene. His already not so good face suddenly turned even worse. Kathy is in such a state, and you're actually still laughing. George is Kathy's handsome neighbor brother, her childhood sweetheart. I sized him up and down and spoke rather impolitely. What does it have to do with me? George was taken aback for a moment. It seemed that he didn't expect me to talk to him like this, and he became even angrier. How can it have nothing to do with you? If it weren't for you, would Kathy have become like this? I was amused. She blames her heart disease on me too. Then do you want to blame me for being born a few minutes earlier, so she didn't get to be the real young lady? George quickly realized what I was talking about. He also knew about the Lincoln family's affairs. Otherwise he wouldn't have rushed over to support Kathy on the day I was brought back. But it seems that he has forgotten that compared to Kathy, who grew up carefree and lived a life of luxury since childhood, I, who grew up in an orphanage, am the more pitiful one. After all, when I was working as a child laborer and earning a meager salary, Kathy was wearing a beautiful princess dress and being taken by her parents to celebrate her birthday in an amusement park. Those family photos hanging on the wall look really ironic. But George was indignant for Kathy. But it's not Kathy's fault. Why are you treating her like this? I looked at him with a half smile. No one said it was Kathy's fault, did they? I'm not blaming her either. Weren't you there just now? I didn't even say a few words to her. It was she herself who insisted on standing at the door. She was so frail that she almost collapsed after being hit by the wind a couple of times. When she saw me, she burst into tears. Even if you pour eye drops into your eyes like crazy, you couldn't cry as much as she did. She just let out a couple of sobs and then fainted due to a sudden heart attack. George gave me 2 fierce glares. Anyway, it's all your fault. If it weren't for you, she wouldn't have been so emotionally agitated. I smiled softly. Fine, it's all my fault, right? Then I'll just leave. To be honest, I don't really care about this place. As I said this, I immediately stood up, held the lollipop in my mouth and went to get my pitifully small amount of luggage. A large, washed-out canvas bag was all my belongings. Compared with this luxurious villa, it was extremely out of place. But just as I slung the canvas bag over my shoulder, I was stopped by someone. Wait, I turned my head to look. And my so-called biological mother was standing on the stairs. There were still traces of tears on her face, and the look in her eyes when she looked at me was a bit complicated. Mrs. Lincoln coughed softly and called me, "Sonny, we've already brought you here. Where else do you want to go? From now on, this is your home." Really? I raised my eyebrows but looked in George's direction. I thought I was here to beg for food. Mrs. Lincoln's face turned pale, and there was a hint of guilt between her brows. "Why would you say that?" I smiled and said, "Isn't it the case? Otherwise, why does everyone want to drive me away? Even your maid here scolded me a couple of times before she went upstairs just now." I spread my hands. "It's just a pity that I don't have a bowl in my hand. Otherwise, you could throw a couple of coins into it. It would definitely sound very loud." I paused and deliberately sneered. "Maybe it would be louder than your precious daughter's crying just now." The corners of Mrs. Lincoln's mouth twitched, and her expression became stiff. She couldn't think of how to answer me for a while, and her face became even uglier. Looking at her expression, I felt really pleased in my heart. I'm really good at saying harsh words. Moreover, these are just harsh words to hear. At least I don't have to suffer any physical torture, like being whipped by the teachers in the orphanage with a bamboo board and being locked in a dark room for 3 days and 3 nights without food. Just let it go in one ear and out the other. Why be so sentimental? I've been a vengeful person since I was a child. When these so-called biological parents found me, the obvious resistance and alienation on their faces, I remember it clearly, perhaps even if I was lost outside. In their hearts, their daughter shouldn't be like this, but I don't care. I've long since stopped longing for something like family affection. Mrs. Lincoln was silent for a few minutes before she spoke again. She looked very tired. All right, we know that Kathy's matter is not your fault. The room has already been prepared for you. It's right next to Kathy's. As for your transfer procedures for school, I'll ask someone to handle them for you. She looked at me, as if emphasizing something, and her voice became more forceful. Let's just leave today's matter at that. What does it mean, knowing it's not my fault? I looked at her, and a hint of mockery leaked from the corner of my mouth. Just then, the frail protagonist was helped down the stairs by others. She smiled in my direction with a pale face. Sister, Kathy looked at me, with tears shining in her eyes. Stay and live with us. I have no objections. Huh, you have no objections. I met her gaze and bit hard on the candy in my mouth, crushing it. On what grounds do you have any objections? I forgot to say, I didn't come here to join this family. I came here to cause trouble. Looking at Kathy, whose eyes welled up with tears again and seemed on the verge of fainting, I felt an inexplicable sense of pleasure in my heart. I bit the candy hard, making a creaking sound, thinking that even though I don't care about all this, I won't let you continue to enjoy it either. Before half a minute passed, Kathy indeed started crying again. I'm sorry, sister, I know I took your place. I'm sorry for you. She sobbed as if she could hardly catch her breath, and her hands kept patting her chest, as if she was about to faint at any moment. Mrs. Lincoln quickly helped her calm down when she saw this. She turned to glare at me, and the trace of guilt in her eyes disappeared completely. I was puzzled and said, Aren't you supposed to have congenital heart disease? Why do you look like you have asthma? I asked kindly. Do you have an inhaler at home? Hearing this, George finally couldn't help but reach out to push me, and angrily said, You're so vicious. Kathy is in such a state, and you're still cursing her. Sorry, I'm not here to pretend to be weak. Because of my agility and thinness, I managed to escape from the hands of the caregivers in the orphanage many times. The director of the orphanage put on a disgusting smile when an adopter chose me. He said I was like an eel, too unruly to be disciplined. So every time he was drunk and wanted to pick a girl to go to his dark room, I was always the luckiest one who could escape. It wasn't me who fell to the ground, but George. It's his own fault for not seeing the foot I stuck out after I dodged. I can't be blamed for that. Kathy, who could hardly breathe, saw this scene and hurriedly came to help him. Brother George, are you okay? I didn't care about this sweet couple at all. I turned to look at Mrs. Lincoln, who had a gloomy face. The latter was also looking at me, and her eyes were even more complicated. I knew she was regretting it, while feeling ironic. I also found it rather funny, so I squeezed out the most false and hypocritical smile and said to her, Well, do you still want me to stay? But it was precisely this smile that made something flash in Mrs. Lincoln's eyes. She looked at me and gritted her teeth. Of course, Mrs. Lincoln said, Anyway, you're still my daughter. I knew it. Before I knew I was going to be brought back to the Lincoln family, I practiced in front of the mirror all night. What Mrs. Lincoln has just realized, I noticed the moment I saw her. In fact, our eyebrows and eyes are extremely similar, especially when we smile. In comparison, the young lady Kathy, who is doted on by Mrs. Lincoln, only has a delicate and pretty face. There is nothing similar to her, but I rarely smile. I hate smiling. Even every time I pass by a place with a mirror and look at my face in it, I always feel very strange. When George left, he gave me a fierce glare. I pretended not to see it. Kathy was still crying like a pear blossom in the rain. I don't know where she got so many tears from. Mrs. Lincoln wanted to arrange a room for me, and I was straightforward. I want the room that Kathy is living in. Kathy seemed not to expect that I would make such a request. She was stunned for a moment, and tears fell from her already red and swollen eyes again. I looked at her and said very sincerely, To be honest, have you ever thought about becoming an actress? It suits you quite well. Kathy probably realized that I was mocking her and said aggrievedly, Sister, I just can't control my tears. I don't mean anything else. I didn't respond. Mrs. Lincoln frowned. There are many other rooms in the house. Why do you have to want Kathy's room? I said matter-of-factly. After living in an orphanage for so many years, I want to live in a better room now. If it weren't for her biological mother swapping the babies, this room should be mine, right? When she heard the first half of my sentence, Mrs. Lincoln wanted to refute me, but after I finished speaking, she fell silent. At this moment, Kathy spoke up and said to Mrs. Lincoln with a sob, "Mom, it's okay, if sister likes my room, just give it to her, I don't mind." I looked at her and said expressionlessly, "I don't like the word give." I got my wish and moved into Kathy's room, but in fact, I didn't touch anything in her room. Instead, I asked for new bedding and slept on the floor in her room. It's obvious that Kathy has had a very good life these years. The whole room is decorated in a pink tone, with a princess bed and a gauze canopy, a neat and clean desk, a wardrobe that takes up an entire wall, and those beautiful clothes, which are enough to show that the Lincoln family really treats her like a princess. Looking at myself, I have old washed t-shirts and jeans, my pitiful luggage, and in the mirror, there are my cold and indifferent eyes. Kathy, who knows nothing and is sick, is pitiful. The Lincoln family couple, who had their daughter swapped and now have to worry about my affairs, are pitiful. Everyone is pitiful, only I am the troublemaker, the unwelcome outsider. I stood up, walked barefoot to the balcony, and stood there bathed in the frosty moonlight. I closed my eyes and thought, then let me, this troublemaker, make you all a little more pitiful. I heard that I have a brother named Simon. When this whole thing happened, he was on a business trip abroad. By the time he got home, I had already moved into the room of his sister, looking like I had occupied someone else's place. I looked at him, really expecting what kind of intimidation he would give me, but to my disappointment, compared to the crying Kathy, Simon is a serious person who doesn't smile easily. He didn't show any reaction to my arrival or to the hope in Kathy's eyes. After he came back, the only sentence he said was, "I'm going back to my room." So after he went upstairs, I was the only one at the dining table who laughed out loud. A son who is so emotionally indifferent and a fake daughter who is so stupid that she can only cry. How on earth did this family raise their children? Kathy looked at me and asked cautiously, "Sister, what are you laughing at? Do you like brother?" I saw panic in her eyes. "Yes," I smiled at her. "I think he's very interesting." I asked Mrs. Lincoln if she had found Kathy's biological mother. Mrs. Lincoln was arranging flowers when she heard this. She was immediately stunned for a moment and then turned to look at me. "Why should I look for her?" She looked at me, with a hint of disappointment in her eyes. "I fulfilled all the requests you made. Do you still want to send Kathy away? Her health is so poor. Who knows if that woman has the conditions to take care of her? Can't you just..." Before Mrs. Lincoln could finish speaking, I interrupted her. "So you have no intention of holding accountable the person who sent your biological daughter to the orphanage?" Mrs. Lincoln was stunned. For me, she probably had already prepared a long speech, but I threw such a question at her. I wasn't surprised by her reaction, so I started smiling again, with a mocking look on my lips. "In fact, to you, I'm still just a stranger, right? From last night until now, you've had countless opportunities to ask me what I've been through all these years, whether I've suffered or been wronged." I looked at her and said word by word, "But you didn't." All right. I turned and went upstairs. There's nothing more to say. Kathy came to me on her own initiative, saying that she wanted to apologize to me. I was swinging on the swing in the back garden at that time. I casually asked why, and as a result, she started crying again. Kathy said she wanted to apologize on behalf of her mother whom she had never met, and she also said she wanted to be good sisters with me. The sunlight was too dazzling. I squinted my eyes and looked up at her. Only then did I realize that even though Kathy was saying these words to me with tears in her eyes, her demeanor was still so superior. If I were her, I would definitely not provoke the person whose life I had taken away. I didn't want to do anything to her. It's just that everything she has now was stolen for her by her mother. She has enjoyed it for long enough. I looked at her and smiled. "After all, you didn't do this. If you want to apologize, then find your biological mother." I want to hear her say it herself. Kathy took a step back and looked at me, biting her lip. I raised my eyebrows and suddenly had a bad feeling. Sure enough, the next second, she fell backward onto the ground without any warning, letting out a rather loud scream. Not far away, my taciturn brother, Simon, happened to be standing there. Not only Simon, but also a handsome young man stood behind him. His bright smile formed a sharp contrast with Simon's indifference. I sat on the swing, motionless. Kathy turned her head to look at Simon and immediately cried even more breathlessly, reaching out her hand to him. "Brother, my ankle hurts so much. Can you come and give me a hand?" Simon frowned and didn't say anything. but still came forward to help Kathy up and lowered his eyes to look at her ankle. However, Kathy held out her palm that was scraped on the ground in front of him, with tears streaming down her face, and said, "My hand is broken." Simon raised his eyes and looked in my direction. I calmly met his gaze. "Go inside." I didn't know who he was talking to. The young man with a sunny smile was named Kevin. He was Simon's friend and came to the house to deliver some documents to him. Unexpectedly, he bumped into us. Mrs. Lincoln asked the maid at home to take out the first aid kit and sat on the sofa to bandage Kathy. Her entire face looked gloomy. Her lips were tightly pursed, and she didn't say a word. Kevin somehow came up beside me and whispered, "Who are you? I've never seen you before." I said, "I'm the real daughter of this family." As soon as I finished speaking, Mrs. Lincoln called me, her tone very unfriendly. "Sonny, explain, what's going on here?" I played dumb. "What do I need to explain, Mom?" Kathy, who was sitting beside her, tugged at her sleeve. "Stop asking. Sister didn't mean it. Didn't mean it. Look at the scraped places on her hands and legs," Mrs. Lincoln said sternly. "The daughter of the Lincoln family will never engage in such underhanded tricks." I wasn't annoyed after hearing this. "What do you mean by underhanded tricks?" Mrs. Lincoln probably thought I was trying to play dumb and deny it. She was so angry that she made it clear. "I understand that you have grievances in your heart, but how could you do something to your sister? She didn't do anything wrong." "Ooh, you mean this?" I took out my phone from my pocket unhurriedly and waved it in front of Kathy. Actually, before she came to me, I was taking a video in the back garden. "Kathy, do you want to see what I filmed?" Under the eyes of everyone, Kathy looked at the phone in my hand, and her face suddenly turned pale. In fact, I was bluffing her. Why would I record a video for no reason, with her confident attitude at that time? I guessed that the surveillance camera in the back garden might be broken. As the favored daughter of the family, she was capable of doing such a thing. It's a pity that she was stupid. She showed all her thoughts on her face and became timid after being tricked by me a few words. Now, even if Mrs. Lincoln wants to gloss over this matter, there are still the witnesses that Kathy deliberately waited for. I want to see how my brother will treat his fake sister, who grew up with him since childhood. Kathy turned pale and tried to struggle desperately. "You couldn't have recorded a video." I rarely showed her a good expression and asked with a smile, "Are you afraid that Mrs. Lincoln will see the video on the phone?" "It doesn't matter. She likes you so much. Even if you lied, she won't mind." Hearing me say this, Mrs. Lincoln looked at Kathy suspiciously. "Kathy, what's really going on?" Obviously, Kathy didn't have a strong psychological quality. When she met Mrs. Lincoln's gaze, her lips trembled. Instead of saying anything, she started crying first. She sobbed and couldn't even speak a complete sentence, saying something like she also forgot whether I pushed her or maybe she was wrong. I was too lazy to listen anymore. I turned to Simon and whistled at him in a playful manner. "Young Master Lin, what do you think?" Simon glanced at me expressionlessly, held the documents and was about to leave. "I don't care about your business." I wasn't surprised by this answer. I shrugged my shoulders to signal him to go slowly. Kevin, who was following behind Simon, winked at me, but I pretended not to see it. This farce finally ended with a sarcastic remark I made to Mrs. Lincoln. "If you dote on her so much, there's no need to bring me back either. After all, the Lincoln family has a big business, and it's nothing to raise an extra daughter for free, don't you think so?" Mr. Lincoln didn't come back tonight either. He was very busy, and there was an endless amount of work in the company. Because of the farce in the afternoon, I didn't go downstairs for dinner. Instead, the maid brought it up for me. The maid who delivered the food was the one who had sneered at me on the day I first came. I remembered her face. I didn't let her in. Instead, I stood outside the door with my arms crossed, looking at the food on the plate. I asked her half jokingly, "You didn't spit in the food, did you?" The maid smiled at me awkwardly. "How could I do that, Miss Third? I said the wrong thing that day. Please don't hold it against me, Miss Third. This address is quite interesting. I thought everyone in this family assumed that I was older than Kathy." I looked at her and moved closer, but still didn't take the tray from her hand. "You really didn't spit in it." The expression on the maid's face became even uglier. "Miss Third, I'm sorry. When you came that day, I didn't know your identity. I just heard that Miss Second had a heart attack and was so anxious that I couldn't control my mouth." "Oh, I didn't react much. How many years have you been working in this family?" The maid was taken aback. She thought I was going to fire her and knelt down in front of me with a thud. "Miss Third, if you're really angry, just hit me." Please don't fire me, I'm relying on this job. If it weren't for the trace of resentment that flashed in her eyes before she knelt down, I might have really believed what she said, but unfortunately, I've seen a lot of two-faced scoundrels in the orphanage and won't be deceived by such appearances anymore. Just as I was about to speak, Mrs. Lincoln's voice floated over from the side. You can go downstairs now. I have something to talk to Sunny about. I leaned against the door with great interest and watched the maid nervously pick up the tray from the ground and go downstairs with her head lowered. Mrs. Lincoln pinched the center of her brows wearily. Let's go inside and talk. I nodded and made way for her. I had already tidied up the bedding on the floor. The whole room was as clean as new, as if no one had ever rested here. Mrs. Lincoln didn't feel anything strange at all. She even asked me how I was getting along. I said indifferently, "It's okay, anyway. It's better than living under a bridge." Mrs. Lincoln's eyebrows twitched slightly. She opened her mouth, but what she said was, "Regarding what happened today, can you please not hold it against Kathy?" I said readily, "Of course." Just as a faint smile was about to appear on Mrs. Lincoln's face, I added, "Of course, if such a thing happens again next time, even if I'm in the wrong, you must remember to ask Sister Kathy not to hold it against me either." When I said this, I enunciated the words very clearly, and my tone was full of sarcasm. Sure enough, Mrs. Lincoln's face changed, but obviously, she has now gotten used to my way of speaking and quickly adjusted. "Sunny, I know you've suffered a lot outside these years, and Mom really wants to make it up to you, but Kathy has been with us for so many years after all, and her health is not good. I can't drive her away. Just like you said, the Lincoln family is not unable to support two daughters. I can give you both the best." Mrs. Lincoln looked at me, and her expression was quite sincere. Unfortunately, I wasn't moved by this. I just said, "Do you know, the one who should have been called Kathy originally should have been me." Looking at the fatigue that Mrs. Lincoln couldn't hide between her brows, I didn't feel the slightest bit of guilt. I said that I didn't intend to do anything to Kathy originally. It's just that she had to come in front of me and play those little tricks. I had to fulfill her wishes. People's hearts are naturally biased. I understand that Mrs. Lincoln has a deeper affection for Kathy, but this kind of differential treatment is tantamount to telling me that in her heart, I'm the child of unknown origin, with blood that doesn't belong to the Lincoln family. Since she wants both, then she shouldn't favor one over the other. Isn't that the simplest truth? Mrs. Lincoln raised her hand and rubbed the center of her brows, sighing. "Such a thing will never happen again in the future?" I asked. "Do you mean the thing about Kathy's underhanded tricks, or?" The corners of Mrs. Lincoln's mouth twitched. "I mean that I will treat you both equally in the future." I sneered and didn't respond. She didn't even want to say something like making it up to me. Mrs. Lincoln paused and then said, "But there's one thing I want to tell you." I didn't have much expectation of her anymore, so I casually said, "Go ahead." Mrs. Lincoln said, "Kathy doesn't really want to see her biological mother. So let's forget about what you told me last time." My face changed. I sneered. "Doesn't want to see her? What does that mean? I don't understand." Before Mrs. Lincoln could speak, I said, "After all, the person her biological mother wronged is me." She was still in swaddling clothes when the baby was swapped. No one will blame her. What on earth does she have to mind? Seeing that I suddenly became excited and indignant, Mrs. Lincoln knew that I probably hated Kathy's biological mother to the core, so she didn't say anything more to add fuel to the fire. Even so, I couldn't calm down my emotions. I originally thought that Mrs. Lincoln's actions had already disappointed me enough, but I didn't expect that her favoritism didn't stop there. Even when I was angry, she just kept silent and didn't show any intention of comforting me. Her coldness quickly made me calm down. I said, "I need a reason." Seeing that I had calmed down a lot, Mrs. Lincoln softened her tone. "It's like this. Kathy is a kind-hearted child. She doesn't want you to always immerse yourself in those past things. Moreover, if we find her biological mother, the family will definitely be more restless. So, stop talking." I didn't have the patience to listen to her finish. I stood up and opened the door. "If there's nothing else, I want to rest." Mrs. Lincoln seemed not to expect that I would be so disrespectful to her and didn't even want to listen to her finish. Her face suddenly turned livid, and she couldn't help but remind me. "You should know where this is," I said expressionlessly. "Yes, this is your Lincoln family, not my home. Sonny's. Do you want me to pack my things and leave now, Mrs. Lincoln?" Mrs. Lincoln's jaw muscles twitched several times. It was obvious that she was struggling to hold back, but when she met my fearless gaze, she finally endured it. Think about it carefully. I'll leave now. When she reached the door, she said again, you didn't have dinner today, right? I'll ask the maid to bring some more up later. I looked at the family photo on Kathy's desk and remained silent. I sat on the floor, fiddling with my broken phone, and sent a message to my best friend asking how the investigation was going. Yes, I didn't place all my bets on this couple. From the first time we met, when I didn't see the slightest bit of warmth in their eyes, I knew that this was destined not to be my home. I must find the person who swapped her daughter into the Lincoln family and threw me into the orphanage without a care. My best friend replied quickly. She said she still needed a little more time to screen and filter all the people who could have swapped the babies in the hospital back then. After getting the list, we would conduct further investigations. I understand that some things can't be achieved overnight. Just as I was about to lie down on the floor and spend my second night in the Lincoln family like this, the door was knocked again. It was the maid sent by Simon to deliver a message, asking me to go to his study. Thinking of this brother who was indifferent to all the farce during the day, I finally didn't refuse. I also really want to know whether he is truly indifferent to all this or just simply doesn't take me seriously. Simon's study is even bigger than Kathy's room. As the person who will eventually inherit the family property, it's obvious how much the Lincoln family values him. I unceremoniously looked around and examined his entire wall of bookshelves. Simon raised his chin and motioned for me to sit on the chair in front of him. I did as he said. He got straight to the point. Are you not used to anything? I raised my eyebrows and felt a bit surprised. Simon was actually the first person in this family to ask me this question. Looking at his face that had no warmth at all and was so serious that his brows were involuntarily furrowed, I was in a daze for 2 seconds. I coughed symbolically twice. It's okay, I don't have that many demands. Simon nodded. What are your plans for the future? No matter how much hope I had before, now the only thought left in my mind is to make the person who swapped the babies get punished. But looking at Simon's face, which seemed as unmovable as a mountain even if his phone fell into the toilet, I had some other ideas. I made up something. My current plan is to drive Kathy out of the Lincoln family. Simon's eyes flashed, and there was something more in his gaze when he looked at me. I met his gaze calmly. Simon nodded. You have some ambition. Me, if you want to drive her away, you need to put in some effort. But the most important thing is that you have to be capable yourself. If you want Mom's favor to tilt towards you, then you have to let her know that you are more qualified to stay in the Lincoln family than Kathy. Simon looked at me. Just being good at talking is useless. I stared at Simon, looking at his well-dressed appearance now. I suddenly felt that he was a bit pitiful. Was this the kind of education he received since he was a child? He was simply a more cold-blooded version of Mrs. Lincoln. Of course, I'm not in a position to feel sorry for him. Under the so-called law of the jungle, it's all about the comfort and carefreeness built with wealth and luxury. I suddenly asked him, then what if I manage to do it? Simon said calmly, I will welcome you as a new member of our family. Who the hell cares about your welcome? I held back and finally didn't diss him directly in the face. Simon's words at least proved that regarding the matters between me, Mrs. Lincoln, or Kathy, he wouldn't interfere until everything was settled. The transfer procedures were quickly completed. As soon as the weekend was over, I had to go to the same school as Kathy. When I went out in the morning, George next door came to pick up Kathy. They talked affectionately downstairs for a while. When I passed by, I directly bumped into George's shoulder, making him stagger and almost fall. George started yelling like a dog, "Don't you look where you're going?" I glanced at him. Who told you to stand in the middle of the road? George obviously disliked me very much. Well, you still shouldn't have bumped into me like that. What if you had bumped into Kathy? Yeah, what do you think should be done? I retorted. George was taken aback for a moment. He seemed not to expect me to ask such a question and didn't react immediately. It wasn't until I walked to the car with my bag that he managed to blurt out, "You're the one who bumped into me. Why are you asking me what to do?" I turned my back to him and leisurely got into the car. The Lincoln family arranged a car to take us to school, and I didn't refuse. Kathy, who was standing behind, bit her lip and looked at me, but then got into George's family car. Are they on very good terms? I suddenly spoke up, startling the driver in the front seat who had been sizing me up. Perhaps in his eyes, I didn't look like a daughter of the Lincoln family. At least, not with this extremely plain attire. The clothes that Mrs. Lincoln gave me were the ones she bought for Kathy last year, but Kathy had so many clothes that she couldn't even wear them all, so these clothes were left at the bottom of the trunk. I hung those clothes back in Kathy's wardrobe. When I went downstairs, I was still wearing the t-shirt and jeans that I had brought with me. Mrs. Lincoln looked at me and sighed, saying that she would go to buy me some new clothes this afternoon. I wanted to retort at first, but thinking of what Simon had said, I held back. The driver replied in a proper manner, "Yes, Miss Kathy has a very good relationship with him. They're childhood sweethearts, so to speak." I smiled, looked at their backs, and said with a sigh, "Do you think, can a childhood sweetheart beat a sudden arrival?" I was assigned to the class next to Kathy's. Her group of classmates somehow got the news. They heard that she had almost had a heart attack over the weekend. When they saw her looking so pale today, they gathered around to show their concern. I thought for a moment, the reason why she looked so pale should be that when she passed by my classroom, she saw me reading by the window. If I didn't have any particularly strong hostility towards Kathy before, then after she took the initiative to tell Mrs. Lincoln that she didn't want them to look for her biological mother, my attitude wasn't as kind anymore. Under normal circumstances, obstruction often stems from a guilty conscience. As for what exactly she's feeling guilty about, I might need to spend some time investigating. Just as I was bored and flipping through a book, the window was suddenly knocked on. When I looked up, it turned out to be George, who had disliked me so much when I went out in the morning. I raised my eyebrows. "What do you want?" George was obviously very impatient. "Come out for a moment. I have something to talk to you about." Just by standing by the window for such a short while, he attracted the attention of many people in the class. Originally, these classmates didn't pay much attention to me, the transfer student, but now, seeing George talking to me, they all looked over. I didn't really want to be stared at like this all the time, so I got up and left the classroom. "What is it? Just say it." George had a sullen face. "Come with me." I watched him put one hand in his pocket and walk in a very arrogant manner, and I couldn't help but find it funny. Was he in such a hurry to find me because Kathy had said something to him in the car? After all, he was still a teenager of 17 or 18, unable to keep his cool. George led me through twists and turns, always keeping a certain distance from me. When I walked faster, he walked faster, and when I slowed down, he also slowed down. Finally, we stopped in front of a sports equipment room, and he motioned to me. I said with a laugh, "What are you going to do? Do you want to lock me in?" "So childish." George frowned, stepped into the room first, and said unkindly, "Is this okay now?" Only then did I leisurely follow him in. I could probably guess what George wanted to talk to me about. It was nothing more than those things, like "Don't bully Kathy. Tell me to be careful both in the Lincoln family and at school, or else something would happen." For a young man, standing up for the girl he likes, what new tricks could there be? So I entered the room, took the initiative to close the door, and with an expression of, "Do whatever you want to say," on my face, I raised my chin at him. George said gruffly, "What did you do to Kathy?" I was taken aback. "What? Don't play dumb. I didn't go to the Lincoln family yesterday. Did you do something to her? Otherwise, why was she crying all the way to school today?" I looked at his handsome eyebrows and eyes and thought to myself what a fool he was. I pretended to be confused. "Didn't you ask her yourself?" Sure enough, George took the bait. "When I asked her, she cried even harder and wouldn't say anything." "Isn't it your fault?" I suddenly realized. "I see. Is she feeling ashamed about what happened yesterday? You can tell her that I don't mind." George was irritated by my vague way of speaking and took a step closer. "Speak more clearly, naturally." I wouldn't be intimidated by his few words. When he leaned in, I also moved forward. The two of us almost bumped into each other. George reacted and was the one who quickly stepped back. "What are you doing?" I smiled at him, revealing a shallow dimple at the corner of my mouth. "Aren't you going to ask me questions? Why are you stepping back?" George pointed at me, and his ears secretly turned red. "Just stand there and talk." "Why should I listen to you?" George coughed twice vigorously. "Then don't move." I spread my hands. "Fine." Only then did George slowly move a little closer to me. He was so highly nervous that he didn't notice that I had been paying attention to the movement outside. When I thought the timing was about right, I suddenly reached out my hand to him, grabbed George's collar, and pulled him towards me. George wasn't on his guard for a moment and couldn't steady himself. He fell straight towards me. I stared at his suddenly widened eyes, and my lips curved into a satisfied smile. I slightly turned my face to the side. The door of the equipment room opened as if in response, with Kathy in the lead. Several girls followed behind her. They stared at George in shock as he fell on top of me. In a way, I should actually thank George. Otherwise, I wouldn't have seen such a wonderful scene. Kathy's tears almost burst out of her eyes in an instant. The girls behind her let out screams and started accusing me one after another, saying that I was shameless and was seducing George and so on. I was on top of George, and the flush on his face spread all the way to his neck. He didn't even have time to look at his childhood sweetheart who was crying. He gritted his teeth and urged me, "Get up quickly." I wasn't in a hurry. I even had the leisure to blink at him. "Aren't you going to help me up, Sonny?" I stopped while I was ahead. I slowly climbed off him and looked down at the group of girls. "Oh, you're all here." Kathy had tears in her eyes, and her expression was devastated. Why did you do this?" I looked innocent. "I didn't do anything at all. It was your childhood sweetheart who asked me to come here." Many people saw it. As soon as I finished speaking, Kathy looked at George in disbelief. Her body swayed, as if she could be broken by the wind at any moment. "George, you. Before she could finish her words, she seemed to be drained of all her strength and fell down, covering her chest with one hand as if she couldn't catch her breath. "Kathy." George immediately rushed over and held Kathy, who was about to fall to the ground, in his arms. "Call an ambulance quickly," he shouted hoarsely. I stood there, meeting the resentful gaze he cast at me, and raised my chin expressionlessly. She definitely wasn't going to die. It was certain that Mrs. Lincoln would be furious and would care for her by the hospital bed. Simon put down his work, and the maid at home brought nourishing soup. I leaned against the door with my arms crossed, watching them bustling around Kathy, just like watching a cliched play. Kevin secretly poked my arm beside me. "Hey, this shouldn't be your doing, right?" I became a bit interested. "Why do you say that?" Kevin didn't care. "This is such a big commotion. It's not that big of a deal." But it almost landed her in the ICU. I've never heard that Simon's sister was so frail before. "Why is she acting like she's on the verge of death as soon as you came?" I was a bit surprised. "Simon doesn't seem like much, but he has some taste in making friends." Kevin smiled, and his round eyes made him look like a harmless big dog. "Then I'll thank you for the compliment." Before I could say anything else, Mrs. Lincoln, who was standing by the hospital bed, finally had the time to confront me. "Sonny, come here." I exchanged a glance with Kevin and took a few steps forward. Mrs. Lincoln had a sullen face. "Kneel down." "I told you to kneel down." Mrs. Lincoln's face turned pale. "I felt sorry for you wandering outside all these years and have always been lenient with you. But what about you? You're so vicious that you want your sister's life." I was stunned for a few seconds, and then I suddenly laughed. My laughter made the people who had been glaring at me look briefly confused. I was too lazy to refute her high-sounding words. I took 2 steps closer to Mrs. Lincoln. "How about this? Let's make a deal, shall we?" Mrs. Lincoln was briefly intimidated by my imposing manner and unconsciously took 2 steps back. "What?" I glanced at Kathy, who was lying on the bed wiping her tears, and sneered, "I'll give my heart to her." As soon as I finished speaking, everyone in the ward turned their eyes to me. George, who was standing opposite, had an especially complicated look in his eyes. I don't know who even drew in a sharp breath softly, but I smiled. "My condition is to send the person who swapped the babies back then to prison. What do you think? This is a very worthwhile deal, isn't it?" Mrs. Lincoln's lips moved, as if she couldn't believe it. "You're willing to give your heart to Kathy, but then you..." My gaze was calm, and I spoke in a gentle tone. "I can die, anyway. Your Lincoln family has a big business. Find some way to make it happen." No one expected that the first person to refute me would be Kathy. Her eyes were red, and there were still traces of tears on her face. "How could I take my sister's heart? And this is murder. I would have a guilty conscience." I raised my eyebrows at her. "What if I have no other demands and just simply want to give my heart to you?" Kathy was stunned and didn't say anything. "Huh?" I laughed mockingly. "You're afraid that I'll send your biological mother to prison, aren't you?" Kathy bit her lip, and tears started to well up again. After all, she gave birth to me. I can't bear to do that." I turned my head to look at Mrs. Lincoln. "What do you think?" Mrs. Lincoln obviously hadn't come to her senses yet, but she still instinctively followed Kathy's words. "Do you really have to find the person who swapped the babies back then?" I said word by word. "So you mean that my life can't buy justice?" Mrs. Lincoln was immediately at a loss for words. When I left, only Kevin followed me. He seemed unable to understand the so-called deal between me and Mrs. Lincoln. "Even if you're really willing, they won't really do it." I didn't confirm or deny it. "Who knows? They really don't dare to do anything to me openly. but what if something unexpected happens to me? What if it's an accident that puts my life in danger? I turned to look at him. Do you dare to bet on human nature with your life? Kevin looked at me, and his eyes flickered twice. You're currently betting on human nature with your own life. I looked into his eyes for a few seconds and then burst out laughing. But even if that were the case, who would care? Can you tell me what you're really trying to do? He suddenly asked. I was merciless. Who knows if you'll tattle on me to Simon? I'm not telling. Kevin actually looked a bit aggrieved, which made him look even more like a dog with its tail between its legs. He said, I have no reason to help him at all. I said casually, well, you have no reason to help me either. Kevin looked at me steadily. You're different. I don't know which word I said in the hospital that day hurt Kathy. She forced herself to leave the hospital quickly despite her illness, and went home to recuperate. Mr. Lincoln squeezed out some time from his busy schedule to come back and visit her. However, compared to Kathy's physical condition, he seemed more concerned about whether she could still normally marry into another family on behalf of the Lincoln family in the future. On the contrary, Mrs. Lincoln stayed by her side without even changing her clothes, showing great care. The maid made soup and tonics for her 3 times a day in different ways, doing her best. Kathy's little childhood sweetheart also came to visit. He blocked me at the stairs with a sullen face and red eyes. You did it on purpose that day, didn't you? You just wanted to make Kathy have a heart attack and end up in the hospital, right? I said with a laugh. Why don't you say that I'm the jinx? Kathy was fine for more than a decade before, but as soon as I came, she couldn't hold on anymore, George said plausibly. That's because you've been provoking her all the time. Fine. I shrugged. So to make it up to her, I've decided to give her my heart, then she'll never have another attack. This was a killer move. George's anger was instantly extinguished by me, and his eyes became complicated. He said, You're crazy. This isn't being crazy. I took 2 steps closer to him. This is being open-minded. Have you ever thought that maybe I'll be more liberated if I die? No biological parents who don't care about me, and no sister lurking beside me like a time bomb. George instinctively stepped back, but I cornered him. If I give her my heart, she'll get better. Maybe she'll even marry you in the future. There won't be any chaos at home, and there won't be any more conflicts. It'll be a happy ending for everyone. George, I whispered like a devil, don't you like that? No. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead. No way. I tilted my head and looked at him, looking extremely innocent. Why not? You all clearly want that. George fled in a hurry. Ha! What a fool. I tricked him with just a few words. I was in a great mood and leisurely hummed a song. My best friend sent me all the lists, whether it was the doctors and nurses who were in charge of the delivery back then or the pregnant women who were in the hospital waiting for childbirth at that time. None were missed. It took her a long time to get this list, but fortunately, she managed it. I really don't dare to bet my life on human nature, after all, in Mrs. Lincoln's eyes. I'm a troublemaker now. In contrast, Kathy, who has accompanied her for more than a decade, is obviously more considerate. I slowly flipped through this information and carefully looked at the photos pasted on each form. The moonlight fell on my fingers, casting a layer of cold frost, like a blade without warmth. I closed my eyes and slowly planned all my strategies in my mind. When Kathy received the anonymous message, I was sitting in on her piano lesson as an outsider. I wasn't sure if it was because of my presence, but she was performing exceptionally hard. She was throwing around all sorts of professional terms with the piano teacher and stealing glances at me from time to time. However, that confidence vanished in an instant the moment she saw the message. Although I was a bit away from her, I could clearly see her pale face and the cold sweat on her forehead. She looked as if she was terrified, noticing that something seemed off about her. The piano teacher asked her a couple of concerned questions. Kathy forced a smile. I'm not feeling well. After saying that, she instinctively looked in my direction. I calmly met her gaze, but she was the first to back down and quickly averted her eyes, saying that she wanted to take a break. The piano teacher knew about her health condition, so of course she didn't say anything. But after Kathy left the piano room, she didn't say a single word to me either. I wasn't surprised. The Lin couple hadn't officially introduced my identity to others, which meant that in the eyes of the world, their daughter was still Kathy and had nothing to do with me. I didn't mind, because I received a reply from Kathy, anonymous. Miss Kathy, I know your secret and who your biological mother is. Kathy, who are you? What do you want? Anonymous, how much are you willing to pay for this secret? Kathy asked me to name a price. After thinking about it, I named a relatively fair price, $5 million. Considering the Lin family's wealth, it wasn't a large sum. As far as I knew, she had a considerable amount of pocket money. As long as she found a way, she could still scrape together that amount. At first, Kathy still had some doubts and didn't really believe what I said, but after I sent that photo, she immediately took the initiative to contact me and asked about the transaction method. I chose to receive part of the payment in cash, and for the rest, she would transfer it to a bank card that Kevin helped me get. The card couldn't be traced back to its source and was very secure. At the same time, taking advantage of the period when Kathy was too preoccupied to pay attention to me, I reined in my temper and got closer to Mrs. Lincoln. It wasn't that I didn't know what kind of child she liked. Acting was a piece of cake for me. I imitated Simon's steadiness, adopted a bit of Kathy's posture of showing weakness, and then appropriately displayed some intelligence that would surprise her. In just a few days, I planted the idea in her mind that blood relations can't be deceived after all. Compared to Kathy, who mostly presented a weak image, the me after was more like a member of the Lincoln family than her. Kathy was busy raising money and didn't notice my opportunistic move. Plus, I deliberately avoided her, so she didn't immediately realize it. On the day I deliberately made things clear, Kathy just informed me that there was only the last cash transaction left. George came to visit her at home. When the two of them were sitting in the living room talking, Mrs. Lincoln and I just came back from shopping. The driver was following behind us, carrying big and small bags. I had a beaming smile and affectionately linked my arm with Mrs. Lincoln's. When Kathy saw this scene, she was immediately stunned. For no apparent reason, her eyes instantly turned red and tears welled up and rolled down. This left George, who was sitting beside her, completely confused. He followed Kathy's gaze, and when he saw me, he instinctively frowned. His expression was a bit complex and dismissive. Kathy seemed to realize her gaffe. She covered her face and left, sobbing as she went back to her room. Mrs. Lincoln looked a bit annoyed, but habits formed over so many years couldn't be changed immediately. She instinctively wanted to go after her and comfort her. Then she turned to look at me, who was still holding her arm. I gave her a gentle smile. "I'm fine, you can go, don't let her misunderstand." With that, I let go of her arm. Mrs. Lincoln didn't catch the sarcasm in my words. Worried about Kathy's situation, she hurried after her. I casually instructed the driver to put away the things we bought while shopping today and was also about to go back to my room. George called out to me from behind, "Can't you not do this in front of her?" Even after hearing such words, my emotions didn't waver at all. I threw back a sentence, "If you can cut off relations with your parents, then I can," without turning around and left, trying to morally kidnap me. Sorry, I have no morals. I used all the tricks I learned from Kathy on her. When she showed weakness, in front of everyone, I just played the peacemaker, but behind the scenes, I would definitely act more pitiful and helpless than her. I portrayed very well the image of someone who had just found their real home after nearly 20 years and had to swallow their anger because of the adopted daughter who had occupied their place. And every time, I would, appropriately, let Mrs. Lincoln discover it. Feeling guilty, she naturally compensated me more. And as soon as I turned around, I would quietly let Kathy know about it. Kathy couldn't think of any other way, so she resorted to her old tricks, but she forgot that the reason the trick of faking illness worked before was that all of her family's attention was on her. Now, with me as a comparison, if she frequently used her poor health as an excuse to be difficult, it would only make Mrs. Lincoln feel tired. During this period, I didn't have any communication with her, but I could feel that this vicious cycle made her feel panicked. But this wasn't my ultimate goal. At best, it was just an appetizer. On the day I agreed to the offline transaction with Kathy, when I went downstairs for breakfast, I bumped into the maid who was cooking nourishing soup in the kitchen. When she saw me, she was very wary, as if she was afraid that I would ask to taste the health soup she had been simmering for hours. I knew it was prepared for Kathy. Most of the servants in this house had been working here for a long time, so it was inevitable that they would side with Kathy. I smiled and ordered her to do something else for me. Even though she was reluctant, she had to comply. Otherwise, if I reported her to Mrs. Lincoln, she might very well lose her job. I made an appointment with Kathy in an abandoned unfinished building. There were no surveillance cameras around. She showed up carrying a bulging bag, without any precautions, so I detained her. If there was an omniscient perspective, no matter who it was, they would think that everything I did was just petty tricks, but fortunately, Kathy was stupid and didn't find any flaws in it. I didn't hide anything and just appeared in front of her. When Kathy saw my face, her mind went blank for a few seconds, and then she started cursing me frantically. Her voice was shrill, and her twisted face was completely different from her usual weak appearance, although I wasn't angry. I was also impatient to listen to her. I interrupted her and said, "Stop making a fuss. I don't intend to do anything to you." However, I changed the subject. "But if you want to leave here safely, you have to pay something," Kathy shrieked. "Haven't I already given you the money?" I sneered. "What about my revenge? Who's going to avenge me?" Kathy struggled violently. "I have no grudge against you. Why are you kidnapping me, Sonny?" "You're a bitch," I said indifferently. "You have two choices. The person who can come here to exchange for you today is either your mother or Mrs. Lincoln. You choose one yourself," Kathy asked in horror. "What do you want to do? Before you went out today, did you see your mother?" "Oh, a reminder, I'm not talking about Mrs. Lincoln, but the one who has been accompanying you as a maid and has been busy cooking nourishing soup for you these days. Your biological mother." I bent down and showed her a devilish smile. "Actually, you two look very alike." It was a choice between two. I really couldn't figure out who Kathy would unconsciously favor. She glared at me, almost with her eyes popping out. "What have you done to my mother?" I said casually. "It's nothing. She's just being treated the same way as you. I've also kidnapped her. You know, I hate her quite a bit. After all the hardships I endured in the orphanage were because of her. As for Mrs. Lincoln, just because of your few casual words. She wants to let your biological mother off. I can't accept that either. If you suspect that I'm lying to you," I waved the phone I had searched from her, "I can call your biological mother right in front of you and see if she'll answer." Kathy took a deep breath. Without her innocent facade, her face was a bit ferocious. "What do you want me to choose?" I smiled and said, "I want to take revenge on one of these two people. If you choose your biological mother, then lead Mrs. Lincoln here. After that, it has nothing to do with you. On the contrary, if you choose Mrs. Lincoln, then you'll never see your biological mother again." And regarding Mrs. Lincoln, I deliberately prolonged the ending. "You've probably noticed that she's been getting very close to me recently and has started to be impatient with you. It's only a matter of time before you become an ignored outsider in the Lincoln family," I said with a smile. "After all, you're not their biological daughter, are you?" Kathy's face became uglier and uglier because of my words. As if bewitching her, I continued to lure her. "If you lead Mrs. Lincoln here, I promise you that both I and Mrs. Lincoln will disappear from the Lincoln family. Mr. Lincoln and your brother are still very close to you. You can continue to be the young lady of the Lincoln family, and everything will be as it was before." I tilted my head and looked at her, looking very innocent. Much like the way she had looked at me with tears in her eyes when we first met. "So, who's the most important person in your heart? Make a choice." Upon learning that her daughter had been kidnapped, Mrs. Lincoln arrived very quickly. I prepared a gift for her. I had installed a pinhole camera here in advance. When Mrs. Lincoln arrived, what she saw was Kathy, who was tied to a chair and sobbing at her, as well as a edited surveillance video that I sent her. Before Kathy made up her mind to lead Mrs. Lincoln here, I confirmed with her several times. After all, since I wanted to take revenge, Mrs. Lincoln's ending definitely wouldn't be good. But even so, Kathy still gave up the mother who had doted on and raised her for nearly 20 years. How ironic. I left a message for Mrs. Lincoln. "Kathy's biological mother hasn't been kidnapped. I just sent her away to do something else. But she must be punished as she deserves. Otherwise, everyone in the high society will know the joke that Mrs. Lincoln has been meticulously raising an ungrateful person all these years." Of course, I also want to thank Kevin for his help. His mother happened to be very fond of gossip and was more than happy to help me spread this scandal. A week after I arrived in the UK, Kevin sent me a message. Kathy had been expelled from the Lincoln family, so had her mother, who had been lying low as a servant in the Lincoln family for more than a decade. The mother and daughter were squeezed into a rented room. All of their former friends had been reminded by Mrs. Lincoln not to have any more contact with them. Even George was shocked after receiving the video I sent him and cut off all ties with Kathy. Kathy's biological mother wanted to find a job, but Mrs. Lincoln always found a way to make her lose it. Moreover, someone spread the word everywhere that she was a human trafficker, and she was spurned everywhere. Before I left a suicide note for Mrs. Lincoln. In it, I clearly wrote down everything I had experienced over the years, one by one. In the suicide note, I said, Actually, I don't hate her. I'm just very sorry that I don't have the strength to be her daughter anymore, because of my past experiences. I've been in so much pain, so I choose to rest in the embrace of the ocean. The first half of the suicide note, which was about my experiences, was true, but not a single word of those sincere confessions to her could be believed. I want Mrs. Lincoln to spend the rest of her life in regret. 3 months later, I met Kevin in London, who had come here for a trip and also to visit me. We were sitting under the eaves outside a coffee shop. It was drizzling, and the sky was overcast. Passers-by were wrapped in windbreakers and slowly stepped through the small puddles with their umbrellas. I really liked the rainy weather here. It could calm my mood. Kevin told me that Kathy's biological mother was ill, but their financial situation was so tight that they didn't have the spare money to send her to the hospital, so she could only lie in the rented room. Kathy had to drop out of school and go to work. She worked herself to the bone every day. And the money she earned had to be used to buy medicine for her mother. As time passed, she inevitably felt resentful. She originally wanted to beg Mrs. Lincoln for help, but she was chased away and didn't even get to see her. She knelt outside the villa for half an hour, pretending to faint and crying, but not a single person from the Lincoln family came out to see her. Instead, the security guards were called to drive her out of the villa area, before Kevin came. Kathy had just rented a smaller house and was going to move out from her mother's place. It seemed that she was going to let her mother fend for herself. The relationship between this mother and daughter, who seemed so close because of their blood ties, eventually ended in a mess. I didn't comment further and instead asked him what his plans were for the future. Kevin winked at me. I like the weather here and plan to settle down here. What do you think? I couldn't help but laugh and clinked my cup against his. Then to celebrate your housewarming, I'll treat you to dinner. How about it? Kevin clinked his cup with mine, his eyes bright. It's a two-way thing. Next time, it'll be my treat. After hearing the story above, what are your thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comments section.